So that's how I feel about this lightweight title bout. And now let's get into the co-main between Tony Ferguson, 25 wins and 5 losses, versus Beneil Dariush, 20 wins, 4 losses with 1 draw. So just a quick word on Beneil Dariush. He's actually 2 of my nephews' BJJ instructor out in Orange County, California. And Dariush is now 32 years old, and he's coming off of a 6-fight win streak, a couple performance of the nights too. I mean, he had a hell of a fight with Jakar Close on that, I believe it was the Conor McGregor versus Cowboy Cerrone undercard. Or actually, no, it was on the Zhang versus Joanna, Adesanya versus Romero undercard. But that was a tremendous back and forth fight, and you know, Dariush is winning like half of his fights via submission, about a third via KO, TKO, and then a couple by decisions. Most recently, in his very last fight against Carlos Diego Ferreira, he won that one via a 3-round decision on the Overeem versus Volkov undercard. So that's a little bit about Dariush, a strong jiu-jitsu background who has really rounded out his striking game as well. But the story here is clearly Tony Ferguson. And you know, it kind of pains me a little bit to talk about Tony Ferguson. As much as he's accomplished, he went on a tremendous win streak where he became so many people's, you know, favorite fighter. I mean, I remember watching him against Edson Barbosa and against RDA, Rafael dos Anjos, and just seeing his performances, seeing how fleet of foot he was, seeing how unorthodox and just dangerous in so many different ways, unpredictable. I mean, in full disclosure, I was watching that Barbosa versus Ferguson fight, and I was kind of, just as I'm watching the fight, sort of found myself kind of pulling for Barbosa, but Ferguson was coming with these chopping elbows, these, you know, attempted leg lock takedowns, these very dangerous flying knees, and was just throwing everything at the guy. And, you know, it turned out to be such a bloodbath for Barbosa, and Ferguson ended up stopping him. I'm like, damn, and this is a few years after he won the Ultimate Fighter. And basically, after Tony Ferguson lost the decision against Michael Johnson way back in 2012, he then went on that crazy streak, beating, you know, Josh Thompson, Edson Barbosa, Rafael dos Anjos. He almost gets a couple long-awaited showdowns versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. After they weigh in, Khabib fell out due to weight cut related health issues, so that fight was off. And then Tony Ferguson fights Kevin Lee, and this was a high leverage moment where you had a surging Kevin Lee, you had Tony Ferguson, who was already starting to become known to be among the very highest championship contenders, almost uncrowned champ like. And so in this Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee showdown, Kevin Lee starts out hot. He's kind of outboxing and out kickboxing Tony Ferguson early. Well, Tony Ferguson turned the tide, survived the early scares, and ends up submitting Kevin Lee via triangle choke. That was a huge win for Tony Ferguson, a big disappointing step back for Kevin Lee, who was, I believe, fighting staph infection at that time. There was a little, you know, controversy surrounding that loss. You know, Kevin Lee wasn't thought to be in the best health at the time of the fight. But man, Tony Ferguson was building such a reputation, and then they set up the championship fight between he and Khabib Nurmagomedov. And this is supposed to be for the title, and then Tony Ferguson tears his knee like a week or two before the fight at like a presser, an indoor like fight promotion related event. He tears the ligaments in his knee terribly. The fight's off. They get a replacement to fight Khabib, Al Iaquinta, and in that fight, that's where Khabib actually wins the lightweight title in a 5-round decision against a late replacement, Al Iaquinta. That was one of the most disappointing just moments to me in UFC history, because they had tried to get this fight together a few times, and for it to fall out in that way, to me, that was the most heartbreaking Khabib versus Tony Ferguson fight falling through. Even worse than the one that would happen another year or two later where COVID ruined the fight. So let's go back to that knee injury where he posted the picture of it, you know, post-surgery. And I'm like looking at, but within months, he's somehow able to, in a typically Tony Ferguson and only Tony Ferguson type of dude can do this. In less than a year, he's back in the cage against Anthony Showtime Pettis, fights in another bloodbath, beats Anthony Pettis via TKO, corner stoppage. Anthony Pettis sustained an injury, couldn't respond to the bell, to the horn, and couldn't, enter the next round. Tony Ferguson wins that fight, and then he also stops Cowboy Cerrone several months later. And so he basically looks to the naked eye like he's picking up where he left off, pre-surgery. But when you really dig into it, I did see a noticeable decrease in his agility, in his movement. If you look at Tony Ferguson when he was fighting RDA, fighting Kevin Lee, fighting Edson Barbosa, and then look at Tony Ferguson against Cowboy Cerrone and Anthony Pettis. Although he also won in those later two fights, he became a little bit more of a bite down on the mouthpiece kind of plotter. He became easier to hit. I thought his reflexes diminished a little bit, and he just didn't seem as springy leg-wise, as athletic leg-wise and body-wise. Something was just a little different to where his fights became more like, I'm going to march you down, I'm going to walk through all your stuff, and then get my stuff off and just beat you by attrition, where I just become this nightmare who keeps on coming forward, and it just makes it the treadmill of hell for you. That kind of became Tony Ferguson's style, whereas he became a little bit more sweet science. That's a boxing term meaning hit and don't get hit. Move out of the way or roll with the punch and then come back with your stuff. He seemed better reflex-wise and better, again, movement-wise before that knee injury. And I think that was something that a lot of us took for granted because he just kept on winning against Showtime, against Cowboy. It's like he's winning, so he's the same Tony Ferguson. I don't think he was the same Tony Ferguson. And in his next fight, once COVID pandemic ruined his, like the fourth Khabib versus Tony Ferguson fight attempt, it fell through. Tony Ferguson ends up fighting months later against Justin Gaethje. And Gaethje basically, like in baseball terms, he pitched the damn near perfect game. He was on fire. And you could see, and I actually did a preview video on this, although Tony Ferguson was the favorite, I picked Justin Gaethje to win that fight because of those things that I was seeing post knee surgery for Tony Ferguson. And Gaethje just like blasted Ferguson punch after punch. These are things that maybe you could get away with getting hit by Donald Cerrone or even Showtime Pettis and keep on marching forward. Not so much against a guy like Justin Gaethje, man. And Tony Ferguson did everything he could to keep on coming. And he took every bullet that came his way, man. And he got stopped in the fifth round. It was a brutal fight. It got pretty hard to watch. It was so violent. Like, especially with the no crowd, you could hear the smack in the just the flesh on flesh every time Gaethje was just lacing him with counter shots, combinations, and Ferguson was just eating him. But, to the point where by the time this fight was stopped, it was with a punch that didn't even look like a fight-ending type of punch. I believe it was like a jab. And then Ferguson got wiped out by it, started pawing at his face as he stumbled back into the cage. It's like, yeah, man, they got to stop this one. And, when you sustain that type of damage, however diminished Ferguson was when he came into that Gaethje fight, I feel like it carried over and compounded by the time he fights Charles Oliveira, he being Ferguson, 6 or 7 months later. And Oliveira, as I mentioned in the Oliveira versus Chandler breakdown, just dominated Tony Ferguson in a way where, just a couple years back, that would have seemed unfathomable. I was giving Ferguson a damn near 50-50 shot at beating even Khabib. Not so much in this last attempt of them making the fight, but before Tony Ferguson tore his knee, I thought that was a 50-50 fight going into it, man. Tony Ferguson, to me, got that damn good. And that's why it's hard to talk about his career in that context, because I feel like we've had that uncrowned champ, and it just feels like because of the way things unfolded, it just wasn't meant to be for the guy. And it sucks. It sucks. And so here we are with Tony Ferguson on a 2-fight losing streak against Beneil Dariush, somebody who I would have thought, not easy work, but I thought that Ferguson would have held it down and beaten him a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and so forth. And I think Dariush is going to beat Tony Ferguson. Now, this is a 3-rounder, not a 5, so I think that Ferguson's going to make it out of the fight. But I think that Dariush is still in a sweet enough spot in his career trajectory where he's catching Ferguson at the wrong end of his trajectory. And I think Dariush is going to win at least 2 out of the 3 rounds and win via decision. And that's going to be a 3-fight losing streak for Tony Ferguson, where it's like, okay, you can't beat a red-hot Justin Gaethje, and then you can't beat a surging, seemingly red-hot Charles Oliveira, and now you can't beat Beneil Dariush, who's kind of a contender, but outside of the top 5 in the division. So then it's like, what's really left for you at that point, and how much more can you kind of like trick yourself? And fighters play these mind games coming off of losses all the time, but how much more can you lie to yourself about where you are in your career? Ferguson is about as mentally tough as they come, and even he will have to start really keeping it real with himself if he can't beat Beneil Dariush in this upcoming fight. And unfortunately, I think that Dariush is going to win via decision. I think he's going to basically beat him even in the stand-up moments. But I think that his jiu-jitsu at this point is probably better. I think that his decision-making is a little more fluid and quick. And I think that we might be getting, at this point, not a totally shot fighter in Tony Ferguson, but one that's diminished enough to where you start using those cliche phrases where the guy's almost a shell of himself. And it, again, pains me to say that, but I'm going with Beneil Dariush here via decision. But yeah, let me know what you think about this fight. Let me know what you think about the championship fight between Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler. What do you think about the title, the lightweight title being up for grabs without Dustin Poirier being a part of that picture, damn it? Please leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.